In 1999, Donkey Kong 64 was released to universal acclaim.
Donkey Kong.
Critics loved the game. It introduced a whole new generation of gamers to the Donkey Kong brand, and it ended up becoming one of the best-selling N64 games of all time. Donkey Kong 64 simply was a tremendous success. And then Nintendo did everything in their power to make sure that we all forget about the game again. They never again did anything major with the newly added Kongs like Lanky or Tiny. They never again used the game's antagonist, Rool, even though he was the main villain of Donkey Kong games up until then. They never used the kremlings again. They never again gave Donkey Kong a coconut blaster. But strangest of all, they never released Donkey Kong 64 on the Nintendo 64 online platform. They managed to solve the licensing headache that it must have been to get games like Perfect Dark, GoldenEye or Harvest Moon onto the platform, and yet they deliberately refused to release Donkey Kong 64, a massively successful first-party game. They are currently in the middle of a marketing campaign for the new Donkey Kong game, and they still do not release Donkey Kong 64 onto the Switch's online service. Just think about this for a second. They obviously do not want modern audiences to come in contact with the game. That's not even all. You see, the Donkey Kong that we all know and love was defined in huge parts by Donkey Kong 64. Donkey Kong 64 is the game that probably gave DK the most tropes that we nowadays associate with the character. But as we all know, Nintendo is about to release Donkey Kong Bananza, a game that is about to completely reset Donkey Kong's entire brand and image. Probably the biggest brand reset in the history of modern Nintendo. By resetting the DK brand, Nintendo is finally cutting the last tie that still exists between Donkey Kong 64 and modern Nintendo. Which raises the question, why? Why does Nintendo not like DK64? What is wrong with the game that makes Nintendo wish we all forget about it? Why is Nintendo trying to move the entire Donkey Kong brand into a new direction, away from its N64 era roots? Why does Nintendo not want modern audiences to play the game on their online service? Why is Nintendo afraid of Donkey Kong 64? What is wrong with the game? And I believe the answer to this question is that Nintendo is ashamed of the game. They're ashamed of a game that sold millions of copies, that critics loved, and that still has a cult following to this day. So why would they ever be ashamed of such a tremendous success? Well, I'm glad you're asking, because this very question is what this video is all about. In this video, we're going onto a journey. We will dive into the depths of Donkey Kong 64, one of the most insane video games that Nintendo ever released. We'll discuss the studio that developed the game and the economic situation surrounding it. We'll take a look at some of the most broken things in any video game out there, period, discuss the level design, who the character of Donkey Kong even is that Nintendo tries to get rid of, chat about one of the worst endings in the entirety of video games, as well as the best opening song ever written. We'll remember what Nintendo wants us to forget, and most importantly, we will dig up the answer to the question of why Nintendo is ashamed of Donkey Kong 64, the game that famously killed the 3D platformer genre, even though it didn't. The game that actually holds the Guinness World Record for the most collectibles in a platformer game. And the game that Nintendo is afraid of. We got quite a bananas video ahead of us. Before we start, just one more thing. This video is going to spoil the entirety of Donkey Kong 64, including the final boss fight. Don't worry, it is not the final boss fight in the background yet, that's just the original version of 1981's Donkey Kong Arcade. Awesome. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give interesting perspective on great games. This is Donkey Kong 64. The game starts before it even starts. The most famous part of the game happens before we even press a single button. The famous part being, of course, the DK rap. Donkey Kong 64 famously opens with a rap song, so we sadly do not have the time to do a close lyrical reading of the entire thing in all its beauty, so let's just quickly take a look at one verse, the fifth and final one. My rapping skills are sadly a little bit non-existent, so forgive me if I just read this to all of you. I quote, "Finally, he's here for you, it's the last member of the DK crew. This Kong's so strong, it isn't funny, can make a kremling cry out for mommy, can pick up a boulder with relative ease, makes crushing rocks seem such a breeze, he may move slow, he can't jump high, but this Kong's one hell of a guy." And then the song repeats the verse walnuts, peanuts, pineapple smells, grape melons, oranges, and coconut shells. So this song has often been referred to as being one of the worst original songs ever written for a video game, and I have to say, I strongly disagree. I don't know how so many people came to this conclusion. The song is great, it's close to perfection. Whenever I open up the game and see my Kong crew hippily hopping around, I just always have the biggest smile on my face. Honestly, this is probably when 90s hip hop peaked and it's only been downhill from there. But that is actually not the reason why I bring the song up. You see, the DK rap actually reappeared in another Nintendo game. It somehow made its way into Super Smash Bros. Melee. In that game, however, Nintendo suddenly changed the lyrics. Instead of a hell of a guy, Chunky is referred to as being a heck of a guy. Hell, after all, is considered to be a slightly offensive word in the States. We'll talk more about this heck of a guy in a second, but first, let's actually boot up a new Ceave banana file. The game begins with a shot of DK Island. Birds are flying around, seals are happily flapping in the water, everything is peaceful, until all of a sudden, oh and no, the kremlings arrive on a huge crocodile-shaped ship. And then, an accident. The ship rams a rock and comes to a sudden halt, right in front of DK's beautiful island. What a catastrophe, in dire need of fixing. Luckily, Donkey Kong is just right around the corner. We swap over to everyone's second favorite Kong and start our adventure. A bird informs us that not only all of our friends have been kidnapped, but even worse, our bananas are gone as well. Our first stop, Cranky's barrel. Cranky gives us a warm welcome, telling us to move our good-for-nothing bottoms to the training barrels that he prepared. Once our training is complete, we meet a gigantic imprisoned crocodile. We promise to help it escape. The crocodile is all happy, stamping around, and in the process it opens up the access to the first stage. And with this, the game already gets going. There are a total of 7 worlds in the game, each one featuring a total of 25 golden bananas, as well as a whopping 500 normal bananas. Each member of the Kong family is able to pick up 100 of those normal and 5 of the golden bananas. The very first thing that we want to do is to slowly unlock the different Kongs by freeing them from their prisons. Once we unlock the entire ape family, we can freely swap between them by jumping into a tag barrel. And those tag barrels are actually quite interesting, because those tag barrels actually reveal a lot about the nature of Donkey Kong himself. But first, during the very first shot of Donkey Kong in the game, there's actually something visible that we glossed over. The very first shot of Donkey Kong actually introduces DK while doing push-ups in his treehouse. The radio is turned up loud, there's a barrel, a car tire, and a steel beam in the background, reminding us of DK's past adventures, and we see the hammock he's sleeping in. But most interestingly of all, there is something on the wall right above the sleeping hammock. And this thing is a poster, a pin-up-like poster depicting Candy Kong. Earlier, when we left Cranky's lab, something interesting, unusual and quite rare had actually happened. When we left the barrel, DK suddenly stopped and started to think for a second. A thought bubble popped up and we were allowed to read Donkey Kong's thoughts for a moment alongside the Kong thinking them. Here's what everyone's second favorite Kong was thinking. What did Cranky mean about training? Donkey all confused. Whenever we jump into a tag barrel, we get to cycle through the 5 different Kongs and get to see how they react to whomever we end up picking. The Kongs either battle for our attention or try to avoid being picked. They are happy if they make it into the spotlight and are sad, disappointed, relieved or angry if we end up picking someone else. And I love this menu. It's pure chaos, but in a good way. It has lots of character. It is a ton of fun to see the Kongs react to our choices, and it feels really fun to see our gaming characters battle for attention. I love it. But this is not why I bring this up. The reason is something completely different. You see, this barrel menu here might be the one spot in the game where we learn the most about the characters of the different Kongs. The way the Kongs fight for attention, how they react to being chosen or rejected, whether they enjoy the spotlight or hate it, and the things they're screaming at us. All of this tells us an insane amount about who the individual Kongs are. Which brings us to the point of this little tangent. Who is Donkey Kong in DK64? Who is the Donkey Kong that Nintendo now wants to replace with a new version of himself? What are the main characteristics of the Donkey Kong brand that got established back in the 90s? And Donkey Kong in DK64 is mainly 3 things. 3 things that the 3 scenes that we just took a look at all perfectly depict. First, Donkey Kong is strong. The very first shot of Donkey Kong that we see in the game shows DK doing push-ups. Donkey is a Kong that works out. But not only does Donkey Kong work out to improve his strength, the setting in which the game shows us DK's workout is also really interesting. The tire, the steel beam, the barrel, the pin-up posters, the radio that is turned up to the limit. The whole setting here reminds us of someone working out in the garage with the music way up, which, So, if we think in media tropes for a second, what characteristics do characters usually share that are depicted doing push-ups in their garage below pin-up posters while the radio blasts out electrical music? Exactly, characters that are thick as a rock. Something that is even more emphasized a bit later when DK leaves Cranky's barrel and we get a glimpse into his thoughts. You see, Donkey Kong is thinking about himself in the third person here, in a sentence that is grammatically incorrect. What did Cranky mean about training? Donkey all confused. The trope of characters that think and talk about themselves in third person and that only speak in fragmented sentences is usually used once again to tell us that the character is as dumb as they come. Finally, there is how DK is depicted in the tag barrel. And here, DK is characterized as being incredibly cool. He's the epitome of 90s coolness. If we pick him, he says, okay. He waves his hands in a cool wave motion when we cycle him in or out. He's ambitious but relaxed. He's just the coolest monkey in the club. And those three things are Donkey's main characteristics throughout the entire game. Donkey Kong is strong, he's cool, and he's dumb. And these three characteristics are the main characteristics that the Donkey Kong brand has been about the past quarter century really. From how he attacks in Smash to how he's depicted in a Mario movie. From how he celebrates in Mario Kart to how he's disappointed in Mario Party. Donkey Kong has always been the Nintendo character that is cool, strong, and dumb. This is the Donkey Kong brand that Nintendo is about to reset, which raises a question. Why does Nintendo want to reset the brand? Why did Nintendo give DK those characteristics if they aren't entirely happy about them? Why did Nintendo create this Donkey Kong brand in the first place? And this is where things are getting interesting because as it turns out, it was never Nintendo that defined those tropes as DK's main characteristics. Strictly speaking, Donkey Kong 64 isn't even a Nintendo game. The company that developed Donkey Kong 64 is called Rare, the same company that developed the Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo. For decades, the Donkey Kong brand was not defined by Nintendo's in-house developers, but by a rather interesting British game developer. If we want to understand why Nintendo may want to get rid of the image that DK64 created for the brand, we have to step away from the game for a second and talk about the history of Rare, the game's actual developer. In 1998, one of the most beloved Nintendo 64 games of the entire era was released. Banjo-Kazooie. And at least in my humble opinion, Banjo-Kazooie is a masterpiece. It is a pure joy to play, from beginning to end. We play as the bear Banjo, supported by the bird Kazooie, who lives in our backpack. Together, we platform through many brilliant worlds, meet many memorable characters, collect music notes and shiny chickies, and prevent the evil witch Gruntilda from stealing the beauty of Banjo's girlfriend. The game is as close to flawless as a platformer game can be. The worlds ooze with charm, and it is a ton of fun to navigate through them without them ever becoming confusing. The worlds are connected by probably the best hub world in all of gaming. Finding the 100 puzzle pieces confronts us with varied challenges, the game moves at a perfect pacing, the characters are charming, the humor is sassy without ever overdoing it, the game is dripping with childlike charm and, well yeah, the whole thing is just a ton of fun from beginning to end. In 2000, another game was released, a game called Banjo-Tooie, the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie. But Banjo-Tooie is a very different game. The worlds are suddenly much larger than they were in the predecessor, up to the point that it is difficult to navigate them and to memorize their layout. The charming characters of the first game were replaced with much more profane characters, featuring much more over-the-top humor. Finding the puzzle pieces often requires several multi-step solutions, slowing down the pacing of the game considerably. To round it all up, all of a sudden the game features long, drawn-out first first-person shooting sections. Banjo-Tooie, while still a good game, just feels entirely different to its predecessor. And that is really interesting, considering that only 2 years passed between the releases of the two games. What had changed in between? And this is where things become interesting for us, because in between Kazooie, which released in 1998, and Tooie, which released in 2000, the developers had released another game. And this game, of course, is Donkey Kong 64, released in 1999. One way to look at Donkey Kong 64 is as a transitional game between two phases of Rare's history. And the one specific aspect that changed the most between those two games tells us a lot about the history of the N64. Back in the late 90s, Nintendo had a problem. All of a sudden, and pretty much out of nowhere, Sony had released the PlayStation. And this very PlayStation was stealing huge chunks of Nintendo's market share, pretty much overnight. Against all the odds, the PlayStation was on track to win the entire console generation by a wide margin. And the main reason why the PlayStation was able to overtake Nintendo was because the PlayStation was much more popular with teenagers and young adults. Nintendo had an image problem. Back in the 90s, Nintendo was perceived as being a brand for kids, while the PlayStation was perceived to be for adults. This perception was the main reason Nintendo was falling behind. They had to do something to change this image, and they had to do it fast. They desperately needed more mature games on their system, but well, this confronted Nintendo with a problem, because their main brands are Mario, Zelda, Kirby, Yoshi and Togepi. Not exactly the best brands to win over 18-year-olds. However, there was one glimmer of hope. One developer that had actually proven that they were capable of making games that people perceived as being truly mature. One developer of which Nintendo actually owned a 49% stake of. And this developer is, of course, once again, Rare, and the mature game that they had previously released is a little gem of a game called GoldenEye. GoldenEye was an incredibly well-received first-person shooter set in the James Bond universe. Back in the 90s, Rare was actually Nintendo's best shot at getting more mature games onto the Nintendo 64. And because of this, it has often been speculated that Nintendo might have approached Rare and asked them if it would be possible for them to differentiate the Rare games more from Nintendo's usually child-friendly games, so that the console becomes more attractive to teens and young adults, which might have been the catalyst that caused Rare to... At the top of the Frantic Factory, there is a small minigame that we can play as Lanky Kong. It's basically a game of Simon Says. Our job is to remember the notes that were played before on the keyboard, and then to input the notes in the exact same order. If we manage to repeat this for several rounds, we are rewarded a Yum Yum golden banana. So far, so good. The twist? Well, the notes that we have to replay aren't exactly musical notes. The notes are burped towards us by the keyboard. We have to replay the correct burp sounds. Hidden in the temple in the angry Aztec stage, there is another minigame. Another minigame inspired by a real-world game. A game of memory. But this game of memory is no ordinary game of memory. Instead of having to match two symbols, we here have to match two sounds. Whenever we fire a plum at one of the stony ape faces on the wall, a sound is played. Our job is now to match the sound this monkey plays with the other monkey who plays the same sound. So far, so good. The twist here? Well, the sounds aren't exactly the sounds one would expect. Instead of having to match different notes or small jingles, we're actually matching different farting noises and burping sounds with their corresponding farts and burps. Whenever we enter a new stage for the first time, a short movie is played, showing us how Rool is monitoring our process through the game. And one of those scenes is really interesting. When we enter the factory for the first time, we see a clip of Diddy Kong, who is being chased by two kremlings. Diddy is teasing them, flying out of their reach with his jetpack, before landing right between them. And then Diddy says something really interesting, something we can read along in the subtitles. Diddy says, "Okay, you two morons, here's your chance," before he flies up and lets the kremlings crash into each other. When we enter Candy Kong's hut for the first time, a really strange cutscene is played. So first, this is the music that is running in the background. and then Candy chats a bit with us. Candy makes DK an offer that is going to make him feel real good. For just a few old coins, DK can have her musical instruments as well as her extra melons. And if we take her offer, she even is kind enough to ask Donkey to get a bit closer so that she can show him how to play his instrument. All the while, Donkey Kong has a facial expression that makes me suspect he's enjoying the melons indeed. So why do I bring up all the farting and burping minigames? Diddy calling kremling morons, or the, let's call it, flirting scene that takes place when Donkey Kong first enters Candy's barrel, one might ask. Well, because I believe those scenes are all emblematic for Rare trying to make their games more mature. You know, children's media usually does not contain slightly offensive slurs like moron. Children media usually does not contain dozens of different fart sounds, and child media certainly doesn't contain suggestive melon and instrument puns. And while we're at it, most children media also does not use the word hell in its opening rap song, or feature an opening rap song at all. In other words, the way Rare tried to differentiate their games from children's media was by making their games over the top obscene and slightly profane. This is a development that takes place over the entire N64 era. There is already a small amount of the stuff present in Banjo-Kazooie, it drastically increased by the time Banjo-Tooie released, and it all culminates in Conker's Bad Fur Day, towards the end of the N64 era. So Conker's Bad Fur Day is a game so profane and bizarre that I'm not even sure if I can do a video about it on the platform without it being demonetized. Just to give you an idea of what Conker's Bad Fur Day is like, let me quote the Wikipedia page of the game, talking about content that was planned for Conker but sadly had to be cut due to time constraints. I quote, Conker would have flown in the sky by blowing up a female cow into fetish outfits and turning her into a balloon, dropping bricks on other cows that exploded into fecal matter. That's the Rare of the late N64 era. So Donkey Kong 64 itself never reached such heights, but nonetheless the game is very remarkable for its slight obscenity, especially if we consider that Donkey Kong is a first-party Nintendo brand. You know, suggestive jokes, farting noises, and slurs are usually unthinkable in Nintendo games, yet here they are, front and center in Donkey Kong 64. Nintendo was likely afraid of losing mature gamers back in the 90s, and thus allowed Rare to depict even first-person characters like Donkey Kong in a more mature way. Mature under parentheses here. Donkey Kong 64 is actually the first game that begins to lean into those tropes, a trend that only got weirder the longer the console generation went on. This very thing is what makes Donkey Kong 64 so unique as a Nintendo game. But this is actually not the only thing that makes Donkey Kong 64 a very unique Nintendo game. There are other things that Donkey Kong 64 is known for, things that are even crazier. Because so far, we haven't even begun to chat about the gameplay in Donkey Kong 64, but DK64's gameplay is really remarkable for tons of different reasons. So to fully understand the story of Donkey Kong 64 and why the game is so remarkable, we have to talk about its gameplay. There are challenge barrels hidden all over Donkey Kong 64. Whenever one of our Kongs jumps into one of those barrels, they get teleported into a barrel minigame room where they have to beat a minigame. And one of those minigames is called Crazy Kong Clamor. In Crazy Kong Clamor, we have to fire a melon onto a golden banana before the light goes dark. If we hit the banana fast enough, then our target score is decreased by 1. If we accidentally hit a Kong, it is increased by 1. If we manage to get the target score to 0, we are rewarded with a delicious banana. This minigame appears 4 times in the game in 3 different difficulties. So far so good. Here's the thing. Crazy Kong Clamor is impossible to beat, at least on its highest difficulty. The screen goes black so fast that finding, aiming and shooting at a banana is beyond human reaction time. And when I say beyond human reaction time, I really mean it. It is not possible to react fast enough. I played this minigame for 15 minutes straight and only managed to hit the golden banana twice. And those 2 hits were more due to my prophetic foresight than due to my gaming skills. Even if our crosshair is already on the correct spot when a banana appears, it is unbelievably tight to hit the button fast enough to hit the banana before the screen goes black. Being able to hit this banana 5 times in a row within only a minute is virtually impossible. Don't believe me? Well, here's the actual time window that we have to find, to aim and to shoot at the banana. You can try for yourself if you manage to move a joystick to the right position and manage to hit a button before the screen goes back to black. Got really close? Well, let's try again. Yup, it's simply beyond human reaction time, which kind of raises a question, doesn't it? How does a minigame make it into a Nintendo game that is literally impossible to beat? Twice, they actually repeat the impossible version. What had happened here? And the answer to this question is that this minigame was actually possible to beat when the game was released. It is only possible when we emulate the game on modern hardware, like the Wii U Virtual Console. So why is that? Well, here's the thing. The original Nintendo 64 release of Donkey Kong is insanely laggy. The game is technically so ambitious that it is barely holding together. It features extreme lag basically everywhere. The game usually just doesn't run anywhere near the targeted frame rate on the original hardware. But once we emulate the game on a Wii U, then the game suddenly runs fine. And this very thing is why Crazy Kong Clamor is practically impossible on modern hardware. On the Nintendo 64, this minigame featured so much lag that we had significantly more time to react. But nowadays, all the lag is missing, putting the already very tight reaction window beyond human reaction time. So luckily there is still a way to beat the minigame, even today. If we pause the game, just as the screen brightens up, then we're able to see the banana in the background, which gives us and our brains a chance to prepare and to quickly react once we unpause, making it at least somehow beatable on modern hardware. So this little minigame that was only possible because the game featured so much lag is not the only unusual minigame in Donkey Kong 64. There are more of them. In the fungi forest, there is an owl, and this owl challenges us to a minigame. This little feathered fellow challenges us to follow him and to fly through all the rings he conjures while blasting in the air using Diddy Kong's jetpack. And this little minigame here. This little minigame of flying through the rings the owl summons is one of the most frustrating gaming experiences I've ever experienced. Here's the problem. Diddy's jetpack controls like a drunken donkey that's someone tied to 3 massive firework rockets. The jetpack controls are just so over-the-top sensitive, requiring incredibly tight inputs to get Diddy to actually fly close to the position that we want him to be. So that on its own would already be quite frustrating, but that's not even the main reason why this is so frustrating. The main problem is that the camera is tied to Diddy's back while rocketing, meaning that whenever we turn our monkey, the camera turns as well. Combine this with the incredibly sensitive controls of the jetpack and the result is... well, the result is probably vomit. Seriously, you haven't known true motion sickness until you tried to grind this minigame for an hour. The camera just flings around so fast and does so many things we did not intend for it to do while we're trying to steer Diddy towards the little rings. It's ugh. And this minigame isn't easy. Beating this realistically takes somewhere between 20 minutes to several hours, meaning the minigame wants us to stare at a rapidly flinging camera for over half an hour, which is just its peak motion sickness. The minigame really is quite hard, though it isn't even the most difficult one in the game. Speaking of which, this here is Beaver Bother. Beaver Bother not only takes the spot as the worst minigame in Donkey Kong 64, a game with an already impressive amount of bad minigames, but it is also a very real contender for the title of the worst minigame in all of gaming. Beaver Bother really something else. Here's our objective during Beaver Bother. We have to gently guide 15 beavers into a hole located at the center of the barrel. We play as a little claptrap. So how does our little claptrap get the beaver into the trap? Well, by barking, of course. And thus, we run behind our first bothering beaver, bark as loud as a crocodile is able to do, cause the little beaver a bothering amount of crocodile-inflicted stress, causing it to run towards the hole, and then nothing happens. The bothering beaver refuses to fall into the hole. Concerning. For whatever reason, Rare decided that beavers don't fall if we chase them towards the hole from behind. So how do we get the beaver to fall into the holes then, one might ask? Which, dare I say it, is an extraordinarily intelligent question, my dearest rhetorical viewer, and the answer is... I don't know, sometimes they fall into it by accident, barking at them from the side sometimes work, sometimes it doesn't. Very rarely they fall into the hole without any doing of us at all, but most of the times they act as if the hole in the ground was a solid steel beam. They are completely incapable of passing through it. I really can't overstate how frustrating it is to even get a handful of beaver into those little holes, but getting 15 of them in there in just 60 seconds is utter madness. That's a bothering Beaver every 4 seconds, which would already be difficult if the hole in the ground would actually behave like a hole. This minigame is so difficult for all the wrong reasons. It's fascinating. Beating this minigame here in the intended way is one of the hardest challenges in all video games I've ever played, period. The Orphan of Cause is a cute little toddler compared to the eldritch nightmare that Beaver Bother is. I really have to get this out of my system, I guess. Beaver Bother, I hate you! You stole countless hours of my childhood, which I'll never get back. To make it even worse, the hardest version of this minigame does not only appear once in the game, but twice. In the same stage, meaning that it is not unlikely to grind this game for 3 hours, winning it by sheer luck, only to be greeted by another round the next time we jump into a challenge barrel, which is quite the experience. So the inclusion of Beaver Bother raises a question, namely, are they serious with this? Is this the intended experience, or did some kind of bothering beaver bug behavior cause the bothering beaver to behave buggy late during development and they just weren't able to fix it in time? Is Beaver Bother insanely bugged, or is Rare just mind-bogglingly insane? So there is no way to answer this question with absolute certainty, but I personally tend to believe that a beaver bug is at the heart of the issue. Why do I believe that it is because of a bug? Well, allow me to answer this question in an unusual way. There is a bit of a running joke going on within the Donkey Kong 64 speedrunning community. A joke concerning walls. You see, as the saying goes, walls in Donkey Kong 64 are not necessarily walls. They're more like suggestions put in place by the developers. A wall in Donkey Kong 64 is more like a would you kindly and less like a obey the wall you must. For example, do you see this wall here in the shack area in Fungal Forest? Well, while this wall is certainly a wall, it isn't necessarily capable of walling us off. All that we have to do is to hit it a couple of times as chunky and voila, the wall is gone. We just punch straight through it. You see this little ceiling-like thingy atop the chimney here? Well, this thing isn't very good at walling us off either, because if we get up there as Diddy, we can just jump through it. We just plop right through, which gives us access to a minigame that we are actually supposed to play as Lanky, causing all sorts of problems. You see those sloped walls here underwater all around the island? Well, as it turns out, those slopes do a rather sloppy job at slopening, because if we dive hitting the set button and then just continue to hammer the B button after we dove down, then the slope just slopes out of the game and we slope right through it, slopening our Kong out of bounds. This little trick here works on every single slope underwater in the game. Just diving towards any slope underwater lets us slip through. This little trick allows for tons of sequence breaks and broken shenanigans all over the game. It is even possible to enter an unloaded room that the game hides below the island that way, a room used for a cutscene much later. Funnily enough, the walls do actually work in this unloaded room, entrapping our poor monkey as soon as we swim into it. Speaking of walls that are actually walling it, shout out to the walls in the boss rooms. Those walls actually do a decent job of walling us out of the boss arenas. There's not a single spot in the walls at ground level that would allow us to enter the boss rooms early. At least none that I know of. You can never be too sure about this in Donkey Kong 64 though. Luckily for us, there is however a wall spot high up in the air that is a bit more suggestive about its walling offing. So here's a fun little trick for all of you to try at home. If we grab DK and move towards any steep sloped surface, then we can jump towards the slope as DK, hit our B attack while we're jumping towards the sloped surface, and immediately after hammer the B button again. The timing here is a bit finicky, but if we do everything correctly, then the second B input causes DK to do his ground jump attack in such a way that it cancels his jump attack, causing our Kong to go whee! This little trick here is called a moon kick, and it may very well be one of my favorite glitches in all of gaming. It's honestly more of a feature than a glitch. It allows us to sequence break tons of stuff, it allows us to reach places we're not supposed to be in, and it just looks amazing. So why do I bring this up? Well, you see this slippery slope in the boss entrance rooms? Well, as it turns out, this little slopery slip here is steep enough for us to moon kick off of it, allowing DK to float towards the spot at the wall and to go out of bounds once again. This trick is possible in every single boss entrance room. Once we are out of bounds, we can load into the boss arenas from below. This skips hundreds of bananas and even makes it possible to fight the bosses playing as the wrong Kong. So those were just a couple of ways of getting out of bounds in DK64 that I happen to know of, but there are probably dozens more. And if you're thinking, wow, the moon kick looks like the coolest glitch ever, then I have very good news for you, because the moon kick isn't even the coolest glitch in the game. At least in my humble opinion, this award goes to a trick called tech barrel storage. So what is tech barrel storage? I hear you ask. Well, here's the thing. We jump into a tech barrel at the exact same time as our character takes damage, then we confuse the poor game. On the one hand, the game now really wants to open up the Kong character section, but at the same time it also really wants to damage us, causing the overwhelmed game to say, screw it, let's do both of it at the same time, causing the game to not pause while we are in the barrel. We are in the barrel and playing in the world at the same time now. If we now play an instrument, well, then the power of the music might cause some interesting things to happen. We might run around with the tech barrel still loaded, we might run around as a Kong but forgot to store our instrument away, we might deload the entire world, we might cause some confusion to the poor camera carrying Lakitu, or we might get Lanky Kong exceptionally drunk. I honestly don't even know how I caused this to happen, but while toying around with tech barrel storage, all of a sudden Lanky started to be all wobbly. He just wobbles around as if he had a banana margarita too much. Or 8 of them? Oh no, we made the poor monkey drunky. Alright, so why do I bring up that many minigames in the game are incredibly difficult for all the wrong reasons? The fact that there are minigames in the game that can't be beaten without cheating on modern hardware, because back in the day the game lagged so much, and the fact that there are approximately more ways to phase through walls in Donkey Kong 64 than there are walls in the game. Well, here's the thing. All those random things share something in common. They are likely all the result of the exact same problem. The biggest problem that plagues the game. The one thing that makes Donkey Kong 64 such an interesting game, but also the one thing that causes it the most problems. And this very thing is DK64's insane overambition. Donkey Kong 64 just does not know restraint. The game is this platformer with hundreds of collectibles. It features 5 main characters, all with different movesets. The game features gunplay and several racing minigames, some of them featuring entirely new movement systems, like Diddy's Flying, the racing minigames, or the slope sliding ones. The game has over a dozen different barrel minigames. It has minecart riding sections. There are roughly a dozen different boss battles in the game, many of them built around entirely new mechanics, like the fish that we defeat on a boat. The game features the swordfish and the rhino transformation. Every Kong learns a specific barrel move that only this Kong can do, and on top of it, everyone also learns a skill that they can use on their specific Kong platform. The game features a separate multiplayer mode. It features secrets in the main menu that we unlock by finding fairies, and the fairies are captured via an entirely new photography system. Every Kong has its own musical instruments, its own gun, and so on. Everything in Donkey Kong 64 is just dripping with overambition, and we haven't even talked about the biggest thing yet, biggest quite literally, the level and world design, because the stages in Donkey Kong 64 are gigantic. They are gigantic to a point that makes it almost impossible to memorize them. Donkey Kong 64 does not simply structure its world around a central hub. It often has a hub that leads to different hub areas that then sprawl out again and lead to the different actual areas. Just take the fungal forest as an example. There's a huge tree in the middle of the center of the first area, which branches out into 4 different directions. One of them is the mill area, around which the shack, the well, and the mansion are built. All those buildings have different things inside of them. Then there's the farm area, the area with the old tree, and the area around the huge mushroom, once again featuring tons of things on its inside. And all those areas sprawl out even further. That's just way too much while playing. After a while, all the different sub-areas that are connected to all the different hubs just blend together. We simply lose orientation. And Fungal Forest isn't even the biggest offender in that regard. The layout of the Frantic Factory stage is actually so complicated that the wiki doesn't even try to depict it in a map. Instead, it features a link to a YouTube video showing a 3-dimensional render of the level to help with navigation. The whole space connects in such unintuitive ways, it's amazing. Strange things like this are just baked into almost every level. The water level does not feature one gigantic body of water, but two. The creepy castle stage features way too many entrances that are split up over way too large an area. The Aztec stage has way too many tunnels that look similar and way too many samey temples. And the crystal cave is not only gigantic, but also looks the same wherever we go, making it one of the most confusing spaces I've ever explored in a video game. Everything in the game is just way too big, way too ambitious, and utterly unpolished. From the fact that the lag was holding minigames together, to the fact that the beavers are very likely bugged in a minigame that they repeat 4 times, to the fact that Diddy's chatback controls are just pukingly terrible, to the rather interesting aspect that almost every wall in the game can be glitched through, or that they never tested what happens if a player takes damage while jumping into a barrel. Heck, I died a couple of times during my latest playthrough while fighting the boss in the frantic factory. I'm honestly surprised I only died a couple of times, because this boss is really no joke. Beating him as a kid is probably still among my biggest gaming achievements, but that's not why I bring this up. You see, during the last phase, the boss becomes invisible and shoots at the pillars, while we have to platform from pillar to pillar until we reach a switch that we have to ground pound. Once we hit the switch, we deal damage to the boss, and he's finally defeated. Here is what happened to me while doing this during my latest playthrough. Yup, the boss killed me the same time I killed him, causing my character to disappear. I wasn't able to grab the key here because I didn't have a monkey anymore to grab it, but the game also did not show me a game over screen. I wasn't trying to do this or anything, it just happened while playing, and that is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. Donkey Kong 64 is so much at the same time. It is so big and so ambitious that the whole thing is barely holding together. All the minigames are unpolished, so is the level design, so are the Kong's abilities or the boss fights, but there sure as heck is a lot of them. And for whatever strange reason, I love it. The game is truly great in its own megalomaniac way. There is this narrative floating around that Donkey Kong 64 is an outrageously terrible game, and, well, it's just not. It's a great game. It's a ton of fun. Even in 2025, the game is really enjoyable. The whole premise is so over the top insane. It gives the game some of the most varied gameplay of anything I've ever played. Running through the insane megalomania that DK64 is just has a charm that no modern game has ever replicated for me. The game permanently surprises us with new ideas, new minigames, new areas, and new abilities. Discovering all the layers of gameplays, it's just really fun for most of the game's runtime. But sometimes the game just completely derails and stumbles over its own shoelaces. Thanks to the open structure of the game, however, most of the stumblings can be avoided. Stuff like Conclamour or Diddy's vomiting fight of puking or Beaver Border are not required to beat the game. We can easily skip those. If those minigames were on the critical path throughout the game would honestly be close to unplayable by today's standards, but they are not. And while there is stunningly bad content in Donkey Kong 64, there is also a ton of great content in it. The trick to enjoying Donkey Kong 64 is just to avoid the weirdest and most broken aspects of its overambitious level design, and to instead enjoy all the great moments that the game certainly has. As long as we avoid all the train-wrecked parts, the game is a very enjoyable train ride. That is, until it isn't. Because strangely enough, we haven't talked about the biggest train wreck in the game yet. The most ridiculous thing that the game ever does. There is one utterly insane design decision still present in Donkey Kong 64 that we haven't talked about yet. Maybe the worst part of the game. And funnily enough, the worst thing they put into the game is also the only thing that is required to beat it. So let's talk about one more insane aspect of Donkey Kong 64, and then let's take all the loose threads that are dangling around and try to weave them into the answer to the question of what happened with Donkey Kong 64 and why Nintendo might want us all to forget about it. To enter the final stage, we have to collect 100 golden bananas. After paying the banana toll, a race against time begins. We have to deactivate a machine in the center of the stage before it blows up our beloved DK Island. We deactivate the machine by completing not one, but 2 entirely new minigames per Kong. We have to finish all 10 minigames before the time runs out, and that's great, all of this is good. But then the huge catastrophe happens. Once the machine is deactivated, we enter the room from which Rool has been been observing us throughout the entire game. We are ready to confront the evilest of all crocodiles. But there is no crocodile to be found. Instead of a crocodile, there is a locked door in front of us. A locked door with 2 coins printed onto it. Behind this door is the 8th and final boss key. We need to get behind this door to unlock the final boss fight. And to get behind this door, we have to find those 2 coins. And to get those 2 coins, we have to do one of the most insane, if not even the most insane thing that Nintendo ever put into one of their games. We have to beat 2 completely different games. Jetpack is a 1983 game that was originally released on the ZX Spectrum and on the VIC-20. And for a 1983 game, it was really good. It actually won the Game of the Year award at the Golden Joysticks that year. But that is not the reason why we're talking about it. The reason we're talking about Jetpack is because the game's publisher, Ultimate Play the Game, was the company that eventually would evolve into Rare. Jetpack is pretty much the first game Rare ever made. In Jetpack, we play as a little astronaut stranded on an alien planet on a desperate quest to rebuild our rocket. We fly around and pick up rocket parts at first and later fuel, and we have to bring those back to the rocket. It's honestly pretty fun for a game from 1983. Whenever we pick up a bonus item or return part of the rocket, our score adds up a bit. Once the rocket is finished, we can enter it and fly to the next stage. So far so good. So what has all of this to do with Donkey Kong 64? Well, as most of you exceptionally smart people have probably already guessed, they put Jetpack into DK64. Once we collected 15 banana medals, we can play the game at Cranky's lab. If we actually manage to grab 5,000 points while playing Jetpack, then a rare coin will spawn into the level that we can pick up, and this rare coin is the first coin that is required to unlock the final boss fight. Here's the thing. Getting 5,000 points in Jetpack is not trivial. The game is quite tough, and to make it to 5,000 points, we have to get quite decent at the game. The first time I played this, it took me probably about 2 hours until I finally managed to grab the rare coin. So the ending of Donkey Kong 64 is randomly locked behind a 2-hour grind of Jetpack. That's how we get the first coin, and while playing Jetpack always feels terribly out of place at the end of a Donkey Kong 64 playthrough, I at least prefer an hour of Jetpack to an hour with Diddy's Jetpack. The real kicker is not Jetpack. The really crazy thing is the other game, because the other arcade minigame that we have to beat is Donkey Kong. That is 1981's Donkey Kong arcade game, the Donkey Kong game, the game that brought the world Mario. So I don't know when you last played the original Donkey Kong, but the original release of Donkey Kong is not a trivial game. It is an arcade game. It is designed to kill us so that we keep feeding it with shiny quarters. But the fact that we have to beat Donkey Kong in order to beat Donkey Kong is not even the thing that makes this so terrible. What makes playing Donkey Kong in Donkey Kong so bad is what happens when we fail at the game. Because whenever we make a mistake, we can't simply begin anew, but we are thrown out of the game and have to watch a slow animation of DK pulling a lever before we have to watch the intro cutscene of Donkey Kong climbing up the ladder again before we finally get to play the game. So I timed this. From the moment we make a mistake and die to the moment we regain control over everyone's favorite carpenter, it takes about 40 seconds. Every single time. Let's just assume it takes us 30 tries to beat the original Donkey Kong, which is honestly already a quite charitable estimate. Most people probably need more tries, but let's just say it takes us 30 tries to beat this minigame. Then we spent 20 full minutes just watching Donkey pull the lever and watch DK climb the ladder over and over again, which is unbelievably frustrating for obvious reasons. So I know what you're probably thinking. Oh wow, it sounds really terrible that we have to beat Donkey Kong once just to open up the final boss. But you're wrong, because we do not have to beat Donkey Kong once. We have to beat it twice, but the second time they made it even harder by adding additional hazards into the game. Beating the original Donkey Kong here twice just takes hours if you're not super experienced with the original game, and most of this time is actually spent watching unskippable cutscenes over and over again, which is just terrible. Those 2 arcade coins completely kill the pacing of the game. Towards the end, the entire game just comes to a crashing halt all of a sudden. The pacing of the the game just implodes here. And please don't get me wrong, the problem is not necessarily that they put those games into the game. If those arcade games would reward us with an optional golden banana, then they would be great. It's the fact that they are required to get to the credits that makes them so terrible. Whenever we enter the final chase sequence, we usually do so because we're done with our playthrough and want to finish the game, which is exactly the moment when we don't want to grind hours of arcade games just to get to the final boss. Those two arcade games are honestly one of the most questionable design decisions I ever ran into, period. So luckily for us, there is a wall-related oversight in the game that allows us to easily skip grabbing those coins. You see, right before the coin door, there is this monitor. If we place Diddy and jump towards the edge of this monitor here, then we go out of bounds. That's not even a speedrun trick or anything. There's simply no collision here because of course there isn't. It's Donkey Kong 64. We just have to jump in here and we're out of bounds. Once out of bounds, we can walk to the underside of the room with the final boss key and backflip back in, allowing us to skip about 5 hours of arcade minigaming. Once we unlock the final lock, the huge Croco is free. K. Rool tries to escape, but his escape plane fails spectacularly and we are ready to face off the final boss in the game. All that is left to do for us is to swim through DK Isle for one final time and to float into the final boss fight. The final boss fight features 5 phases, all built around mechanics we never encountered in the game before and all terribly undercooked. We first have to barrel shoot ourselves at K. Rool as DK, then buckle up the puke pack and shoot down stage lights before grabbing banana barrels that make K. Rool slip on a banana before entering K. Rool's shoes as Tiny Kong, where we have to survive dangerous Giga Toe attacks before finally beating K. Rool up as Huge Chunky. If we fail any of those phases, we have to replay all the previous ones. All the mechanics are very unpolished, but that didn't stop them from turning the difficulty up way too high, and yeah, it's a very fitting final boss fight for the game, isn't it? Once we land at the final blow, however, K. Rool is not yet defeated. You see, all of a sudden, the music changes and the camera pans onto the entrance of the arena. And then suddenly, Candy Kong appears out of nowhere. The sudden appearance of the beautiful maiden seems to distract K. Rool so much that he forgets that he's actually fighting against his archenemy. A sudden shift in priorities. Being entirely hypnotized by Candy's beauty, only held back by the ropes of the rings, K. Rool, however, fails to notice that Candy did not come alone. Oh no, sneakily Funky Kong, the game's weapon merchant, also sneaked into the arena, and Funky brought something along, a terrible new weapon perfectly suited to get rid of dangerous crocodile leaders once and for all. Funky brought his boot cannon. While K. Rool is still entranced by the beauty of the moment, all of a sudden a rocket boot hits his bottom, catapulting K. Rool not only out of this game, but out of the entire Donkey Kong franchise for good. In the end, it wasn't our fighting skills that defeated K. Rool. It wasn't the skills we learned during the game or the friends that we made along the way that allowed us to defeat him. Heck, it wasn't even us who defeated him. In the end, it was K. Rool's horniness that got the better of him, and a monkey with a really big gun. The credits roll, we get a shot of all the Kongs happily enjoying life on the island again before 3 birds appear all of a sudden and fart the DK logo into the sky. And with this, Donkey Kong 64 finds a fitting end. And I love this hot mess with all of my heart. And with this, there is only one thing left for us to do. We have to answer the question from the beginning of the video. So what had happened with Donkey Kong 64? Why did the game turn out the way it is? What was going on with Rare that made this very unusual game possible? And most importantly of all, why does Nintendo want us to forget that this game even exists? And I think the best way to answer this question is by thinking about Donkey Kong 64 through a specific angle. You see, Donkey Kong 64 is Nintendo's puberty. In the 90s, when Nintendo was challenged to appeal to a more mature crowd for the first time, Nintendo made the same mistake that most kids make when they first try to pass as adults. They mistook obscenity for maturity. They lost any restraint and, quite honestly, the grip to reality for a bit. They utterly overestimated themselves and what they are capable of. The whole game is as if they had asked a 13-year-old what the best possible video game ever would be like, and he answered them, that the game got shooting and platforming, and that the worlds are huge, and there are minigames and racing and bosses, and the bosses are actually hard, and the minigames are tough, and the main character is cool and he raps. But it's also funny in like there are farts and burp jokes everywhere, and there's one character that is really hot and everyone wants to date her, and there is not one main character but 5, and they all have like totally different skill sets and guns, lots of guns. And to beat the game you also have to beat the original game, but we remix it so that it is even tougher, and it got an additional multiplayer mode that's all about shooting, and I just don't know how to put this. The whole premise of Donkey Kong 64 sounds as if a bunch of 13-year-olds pitched it to Miyamoto, and he was like, that sounds like such a good idea, take the Donkey Kong brand and do with it whatever you want. I think the best way to think about Donkey Kong 64 is as Nintendo's puberty. It's Nintendo doing very strange things, as we all did while growing up. And just like most of us, Nintendo is probably not keen to remind people of all those strange things they did during their puberty. After all, we all want to leave this behind at some point and be treated like the adults that we cosplay to be. And I believe this is the reason why they feel the need to rebrand the Donkey Kong brand. The Donkey Kong brand that we all know and love was created during a time of confusion, while Nintendo was still trying to figure out who they eventually wanted to be. And to be fair, after having replayed Donkey Kong 64 for this video, I do understand why they maybe want to get a bit more distance between themselves and the farting bird game, but while I do understand why they want to fill the DK brand with new tropes, I do not agree with them trying to distance themselves from the original, up to the point that it is the only major game which they never released on the Switch. Because whether Nintendo likes it or not, Donkey Kong 64 is part of who they are, and it is part of how they became who they are today. There is no escaping one's past, it is forever part of one. So it's a much better idea to embrace it and to take all of this with a bit of humor, because after all, the more they try to make people forget about that one time Diddy said moron or the Candy Kong melon puns, the more they encourage us to make videos on this topic and talk about the game online. Finally, what happened to Rhea? Well, Rhea kind of got stuck in adolescence much longer than Nintendo did. Nintendo never made a game as pubertal as Donkey Kong 64 ever again. In 2000, Nintendo already released Majora's Mask, in 2002 Wind Waker, two very mature games for very different reasons. Yet in between those two Zelda games, Rhea actually released Conker's Bad Fur Day, a game famous in part for... Well, let me just quote the Wikipedia article again. Obtaining access to the entrance requires going through a sewer pipe, only accessible after defeating a big opera singing chunk of poo named the Great Mighty Poo. Windy has a beetle-populated area entirely filled with fecal matter, consisting of a big poo mountain and a poo cabin, and a river next to it. Or in other words, while Nintendo quickly changed direction after having experimented with the adolescent style of Donkey Kong 64, Rare actually doubled down on the overambition, the unpolished craziness and the obscenity. And only a couple of years later, when Nintendo had the chance to buy Rare, they decided to pass up the chance and made it possible for Microsoft to pick up one of the developers that defined the entire N64 era. I think one way to look at the relationship between Nintendo and Rare is as a friendship between two teenagers that grew apart when one of them was ready to mature up, while the other one still thought that it is awesome to have cows explode into fetish parts and have it rain feces. Hooray! Really encouraging closing words today. So here we have it, Donkey Kong 64, one of the most interesting video games Nintendo ever published. Before we wrap this up, just two more things. So first, a gigantic thank you to all my wonderful patrons whose names are currently floating by. If you enjoyed this video, you have in large parts to thank them for that, because not only does their generous support make videos like this one possible in the first place, but those people did actually vote for this very video. I gave them a choice whether they wanted me to do a video on Donkey Kong 64, Skyward Sword or the Elden Ring DLC, and those wonderful people chose the fart memory game in a heartbeat. A huge thank you to all of them. Finally, the fairies. I hate the fairies in Donkey Kong 64. I hate them with such a passion, it's not even funny, and there's no way that I do not end this video without insulting those dumb banana fairies. You see, there's a small minigame-like thingy in the game that we have to succeed in to capture one of the dumb fairies. To catch them, we have to take a picture of them with a Polaroid camera. The only problem, well, those dumb little fairies always flap their way out of the picture at the very last moment, causing us to watch a terribly drawn-out sequence of our picture slowly develop developing while the fairy floats above us, laughing at us with its sinister laugh. Some of those fairies are so unbelievably frustrating to photograph that I honestly believe they put in extra code to make sure that the fairies always fly out of the picture the second we hit the photo button. I hate those fairies and I hope all of them die in a violent crocodile-related accident. That's all, just needed to get this off my chest. Awesome. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed this little video. Donkey Kong. If you did, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and if you're interested in more long-form content discussing interesting games, subscribing might be a good idea as well. The next couple of videos will be about the big Switch 2 release games, so expect more Donkey Kong soon. Finally, if you really loved the video and want to help content like this survive on the platform, then there is also the option to support me via Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, lots of hugs.